Bob? Gun. I want to need a minute or two alone, boys. Batman: Return of the Joker, released in 1992 for Game Boy courtesy of Sunsoft, has no relation to the Nintendo Entertainment System game of the same name other than the title and the stock cover art, cause it's not the same game, you see. Though one has to wonder if Game Boy was even capable of reproducing that title, which was one of the more visually impressive games on the NES. I mean, they tried to bring that over to Genesis and that failed miserably, and the less said about the unfinished SNES version the better, but I digress. Anyway, Batman Return of the Joker is more of a spiritual sequel to Batman the video game. The NES version, not the chipified Game Boy version. Batman on the NES was one of the better licensed titles to grace the system. Great gameplay, fantastic visuals and sound, tight controls, and so a Game Boy title using that game as a foundation to build off of should be a sign of success. Or at least that's the theory. So you start a new game and you're greeted with this stage select screen and its somewhat familiar sounding music. Hey, at least this kinda sorta sounds like that one game there, but I digress. Anyway, the game lets you pick one of 3 stages, upon which the completion of all 3 will net you a 4th and final stage, so it's a fairly short game that could be completed in a fairly short amount of time. Again, that's the working theory anyway. As mentioned, Batman plays similarly to his initial NES outing. You can run around, you could punch, you could jump off walls to reach higher places, and there are even pickups where you could toss batarangs for long-range attacks. Your only long-range attack in this game, by the way. In addition, by pressing up on the D-pad, Batman can also use a grappling hook to rappel himself across chasms or just keep himself airborne for a little bit. It's a neat little tool to have in your arsenal, even if it's not the most intuitive piece of business, which leads into the key crippling issue with Return of the Joker on Game Boy, and that is control, or lack thereof. Simply put, control is nowhere near as tight or as smooth as it should be compared to what came before. Batman has a bit of a slippery feel and momentum that makes precise movement a pipe dream, which isn't ideal for navigating hazards or platforms. His jumps also feel somewhat floaty and unreliable. Pulling off the wall jump is simple enough and on the surface it works well enough, but it also doesn't feel quite right. It's not quite NES Strider broken, thank fuck for that, but it's also not NES Batman tight. It's somewhere in the middle and also open to scrutiny. And as far as the grappling hook, the newest edition, is concerned, it is a useful tool if you get the hang of its quirks. Pressing up to launch a grapple, waiting for the right angle, and jumping to propel yourself further. You could potentially skip large bits of level with proper use of the grappling hook, but if you happen to swing into a piece of wall or solid scenery, you'll drop down like a rock and potentially fall into a pit below. If control were the only thing that could have used a bit of polish, it'd be one thing, but Return of the Joker has other issues as well. At 4 stages of play, it's a relatively short game, each stage comprising several segments in a boss fight. Again, you have to clear the first 3 stages to unlock the 4th and final stage, and this is no easy task by any means. In addition to poor controls, Batman also has to contend with questionable hit detection, especially as it relates to his relatively worthless punch, which is your only means of attack aside from the limited batarang shots you pick up. And enemies tend to be pretty aggressive in this game, running in at you at great speeds, which makes striking these goons and actually landing a blow a lottery at best. Some enemies will even launch projectiles off screen, giving you little time to react to either the attack or your generally slippery movement. Batarangs are generally helpful in fending off these foes, but you only have a limited number of shots per pickup, and some foes, particularly bosses, can deflect batarangs entirely. Finally, there's the screen crunch due to the smaller resolution, which means taking chances with leaps of faith and what have you. This, along with the slippery control, the questionable hit detection, and of course the traditional knockback whenever you suffer a hit, makes Return of the Joker a needlessly frustrating affair. There is a difficulty select which affects certain aspects such as whether certain hazards hurt you or not, but either way you only get 4 tries to complete all 4 stages, and once those have expired, the game ends and it's back to square one. Your only other saving grace, such as it is the rare pickup hidden in stages that will extend your life meter by 1 point, but even that doesn't make up for the game's other various issues. For what it's worth, Return of the Joker isn't a bad looking game. There's actually a couple neat effects that probably don't translate well to this ancient method of DVD recordings ripped into a digital format usable in Vegas, such as the effect to simulate rising and falling water levels. The train level is also rather nice looking with its pseudo-parallax effects. The other levels are less impressive but still somewhat distinct looking. Sewers look like sewers and such. The sprites are less defined, but you could still make them out somewhat. Batman, other Batman, this Wolverine-looking dude called Darkclaw that predates the amalgamated version that would spawn for that whole DC versus Marvel thing that was a thing once upon a time. I'm surprised we didn't get a cinematic universe of that rubbish yet, not that it really matters, but anyway. And of course, this being a Sunsoft release, Return of the Joker has a modestly sized but superb collection of chiptunes to serenade your Cape Crusadings. Well, okay, admittedly, it's not the best sound output to come out of the 8-bit Sunsoft camp, and the second stage theme can be best described as ear violation central on a good day, but the rest of the tunes are pretty decent, catchy jingles if nothing else. Sound effects are generally low-key, stock stuff. Nothing really special there. Overall, Batman Return of the Joker on Game Boy is an unfortunate disappointment, because it really does have the makings of a great game, and following the basic templates of one of the better Batman titles on NES and slightly adding to that formula was a step in the right direction, but it is marred by slippery controls, reduced visibility, and a considerable lack of polish. This is another one of those cases where it needed a little more time to cook in order to tighten the controls, tweak some aspects of gameplay, and perhaps take the Game Boy limitations into consideration. Then this would have been another fine Batman game to add to the pile. As it is, Return of the Joker is certainly a playable game, but not one without its frustrations. Not an outright terrible game by any means, but it could have been so much better. All in all, an utterly disappointing and entirely skippable Legend of the Dark Knight, best left rotting. Don't bother with this one.